John, Sandra, and their daughter Emily's home had its own cozy charm, despite the unspoken tension that lingered over their family life. On the surface, they seemed like a perfectly ordinary family. John, hardworking and modest, worked night shifts to make sure his wife and daughter wanted for nothing, while Sandra managed the household. He spent long hours with accounting documents, doing his best to keep the family afloat, even though the work exhausted him. John never complained, even if he felt his wife's coldness, tired of her constant irritation and dissatisfaction. Sandra, however, with her capricious and changeable personality, felt unfulfilled. She had long since stopped seeing in John the man who once attracted her. His routine, constant busyness, and rare attempts at romance now irritated her more than they pleased her. To her, John was a simple, ordinary man, and she was increasingly drawn to vibrant, lively people who could awaken in her feelings she thought had been lost to the past. And then Jason entered their lives. He was Emily's boyfriend, a student from her university. Young, energetic, full of ideas and charismatic, he attracted attention wherever he went. Every look he gave showed confidence and a hint of audacity. When Jason started visiting them, Sandra immediately felt her heart beat faster. She looked at him as something forbidden, yet incredibly alluring. Though she tried to convince herself it was a passing infatuation, she soon realized she couldn't take her eyes off him. Jason, too, noticed Sandra's interest. At first he found it strange, but soon he saw it as a game that ignited an incredible thrill in him. Living a double life, dating Emily while finding secret moments to be alone with her mother, became something fascinating, something that fueled his pride and charm. Young and full of life, he saw it all as an adventure, a dangerous and forbidden intrigue. At first it was just lingering glances, held a second too long. Jason noticed how Sandra looked at him, and in her gaze was something more than simple sympathy for her daughter's boyfriend. He started finding more excuses to visit, spending long hours in their living room or kitchen, staying with Sandra while Emily briefly left the house. They sat across from each other pretending to be having an ordinary conversation, but in every word, every movement, there was a tense game they both plunged deeper into. One day, when Emily left to get her books, Sandra and Jason were left alone in the living room. She sat next to him, her hand barely touching his. He leaned slightly toward her, as if by accident, and their eyes met. For a moment, silence filled the room, as if the air thickened with their unspoken dialogue. It was only a touch, but for both of them, it became the beginning of something they could no longer stop. Jason felt a rush of adrenaline, sensing he was on the edge of real danger. With each passing day, their attraction grew stronger. They found excuses to be alone, timing it perfectly when John was at work and Emily went to her classes. They became accustomed to the secrecy, whispering in the kitchen, hidden behind closed doors, brushing against each other in passing when someone from the family was nearby. For Jason, it became a game, where he balanced between his love for Emily and his secret affair with her mother. Sandra, having adapted to this risky double life, lost her previous caution. She relished every moment, every stolen kiss, every glance Jason threw her way, even while Emily was nearby. She was fully immersed in the passion, forgetting about John, who, in her mind, was oblivious. Her attitude toward her husband grew even colder. She simply stopped paying attention to him. With each day, the passion between Sandra and Jason grew more intense. Their secret meetings were no longer just a game. They were the very air they breathed. Their affair quickly escalated from subtle glances and fleeting touches into something bolder and more dangerous. They were no longer satisfied with moments alone. Now, when the house was empty, they arranged full-blown dates, risking being caught at any moment. Initially, they timed their meetings around Emily's classes and John's work, but soon their desire grew so strong they no longer feared the risk. Sometimes Jason would visit under the pretext of meeting Emily, knowing she wouldn't be home for another hour or two. Sandra would wait for him with a racing heart, filled with both excitement and fear. They were drawn to each other like magnets, unable to stay apart. Their passion grew reckless. Once, when Emily stepped outside to take a phone call, they exchanged a quick but fervent kiss right in the living room. They could hear her footsteps, her voice, yet it only fueled them. The thrill of danger was intoxicating. Sandra and Jason reveled in deceiving everyone, believing no one suspected that beneath the surface of their seemingly happy family, a hidden relationship was tearing them apart from within. Sandra felt young and desired once more. She never once considered the possibility that these relationships could destroy her life. On the contrary, she felt fully in control, believing she held all the cards. To her, John was too busy with work to notice anything, and Emily too young and naive to realize her boyfriend was drawn to her mother. Jason, emboldened by his success, found pleasure in managing two lives at once. He skillfully balanced between his dates with Emily, lifting her in his arms and kissing her, as she had always dreamed, and his passionate encounters with her mother. A daring sense of adventure drove him to take ever riskier steps. He was confident he could keep up the double life for as long as he liked. Each time he caught Sandra's eye or brushed her hand, it felt like the world revolved around him. But, as often happens, their confidence became their weakness. With each new meeting, their caution waned. They became lax about checking Emily's whereabouts, assuming she wouldn't return early. They left traces. Sandra's earring forgotten in the bathroom, lipstick smudged on Jason's collar. Small details that could easily give them away, but neither Sandra nor Jason paid attention to these details, believing their deception would go unnoticed. This continued for weeks, and soon they completely forgot about caution. One day, on one of those days when they both felt untouchable and completely safe, Jason came over to their house again. Emily was supposed to be in class and John at work, so everything seemed perfect for a meeting. Jason and Sandra settled on the couch in the living room, where, in their opinion, no one could disturb them. They talked, laughed, enjoying their double life, thinking they had everything under control. Suddenly the door opened and Emily appeared on the threshold. She had returned early due to canceled lectures and was surprised to see her boyfriend sitting with her mother in the living room. Jason immediately jumped up from the couch but quickly composed himself, his face taking on a calm and serene expression. He turned to Emily with a light smile and, as if nothing had happened, said, "Emily, you're home. I decided to surprise you and came over early. I was waiting for you, and your mom kept me company so I wouldn't be bored." Sandra, holding her breath, sat next to him, trying not to show her shock. She realized that Jason had deftly handled the situation and tried to make it look as though nothing unusual had happened. Emily, although surprised, didn't suspect anything. She took it as a sweet attempt by Jason to surprise her, and her face lit up with joy. "Really? That's so unexpected," Emily said, coming over and hugging him. "How nice of you to come early." She turned to her mother and thanked her for keeping Jason company, naively thinking they were just having a friendly conversation. Emily sat down next to them, and Jason, quickly assessing the situation, continued the conversation, acting as if he had come solely for her. After this incident, Sandra and Jason became even less concerned about the safety of their affair. They decided that they could continue their meetings even with Emily present without arousing suspicion. Now they felt they had full control over the situation, and that no one would ever uncover their secret. All this time, John suspected nothing. He was a simple man, accustomed to trusting his family, and would never have thought that something like this could happen between his wife and his daughter's boyfriend. His work consumed him entirely. Long hours spent in the office over documents turned him into a man barely noticing what was happening at home. When he returned late at night, he would find Sandra alone, sitting in front of the TV, where her favorite show monotonously played. She barely looked up at him, mechanically answering questions, and immediately returned to the screen. Sometimes they would have dinner together, but their conversations were sparse. John knew he couldn't offer his wife the emotions she might have wanted. He thought that over time, as they got older, their marriage had simply cooled off. A normal occurrence, he believed, for a couple who had spent decades together. He resigned himself to it, thinking it was only natural. Every evening looked the same. John would sit in the kitchen, finish his dinner, and Sandra would go to the living room, leaving him alone. He had grown accustomed to the silence, which became increasingly oppressive, but he didn't try to break it, assuming that this was just how their life was now. John didn't notice the small clues that might have led him to the truth. Lipstick stains on the dishes, a faint unfamiliar scent in the house, barely noticeable marks from careless touches on the furniture. All of this slipped past his attention, and he didn't ask any extra questions. He believed he understood Sandra and her aloofness, thinking it was simply a sign of her exhaustion. Meanwhile, Sandra and Jason felt more and more secure. After they had successfully kept the truth from Emily, they were finally convinced that no one would ever uncover their secret. Now they allowed themselves more than before, almost not bothering to hide their attraction. Their meetings became regular, and the risk only added to the excitement. One day, Emily told her mother that she was leaving for the weekend to visit a friend's birthday party in a neighboring city and planned to stay overnight. Sandra, hiding her excitement, nodded, wished her a good time, and assured her that Jason would be pleased with how well she organized the trip. As soon as the door closed behind her daughter, Sandra couldn't hold back and called Jason to tell him the house was free. John, as always, was at work, and Sandra knew that even if he returned, it would be late at night. By that time, Jason would already be prepared to act as if he had simply come over to discuss his relationship with Emily, or to give her something important. Jason arrived close to noon. Sandra greeted him with the look of a confident hostess. She wore a light, flowing dress that highlighted her figure. With a smile, she invited him into the house, feeling more self-assured than ever. They started with a leisurely lunch in the living room, not in a hurry, savoring every minute, every glance, and every word. They no longer needed to hide or sneak moments to be alone. This was their day. After lunch, they walked around the house, laughed, hinted at each other, exchanging long glances. Jason felt as though he were in his own world, a world where he simultaneously had both Emily and her mother, while Sandra, confident in her control over the situation, saw in him a chance to relive the youth she had long dreamed of. They spent time together, seemingly without a care, not thinking about the consequences their relationship might bring. Hour by hour, the day stretched on, filled with lightness and intrigue, where every step, every accidental meeting of their gazes seemed to only fuel the passion between them. By evening, wrapped up in each other, Sandra and Jason had already stopped checking the time. They felt that nothing could break their secret paradise. Without a second thought, Sandra led him upstairs to the bedroom where they could express their feelings openly and forget everything else. In that moment, they thought only of each other, and of the passion that now consumed them entirely. They were certain they had plenty of time and that nothing could interrupt their meeting. Meanwhile, John, feeling that his relationship with his wife had become a shadow of its former closeness, decided to do something unexpected for her. He had long felt that a chasm had grown between them, but he wanted to try to bring warmth back into their marriage. On the way home, he stopped by a flower shop, picked out her favorite flowers, then dashed into a small restaurant and ordered takeout, adding a bottle of wine to the order. He imagined how pleasantly surprised she would be, and how they could spend the evening together trying to recapture something that had once been so meaningful to them both. When he entered the house, he noticed that everything around looked as if Sandra was alone. This thought actually made him feel a little relieved when he saw the empty living room, thinking once again that he could surprise her in their usual setting. He placed the bags of food in the kitchen, planning to quietly head upstairs to catch her off guard with the flowers and dinner. However, as he climbed the stairs, John heard sounds coming from the bedroom. Immediately, he felt an unexplainable tension. These were not the sounds he had expected to hear. As he approached the door, he noticed a shirt on the floor, a shirt he had seen Jason, their daughter's boyfriend, wear several times. Everything inside him collapsed. Barely breathing, John listened, and what he heard finally shattered his inner world. He stood at the threshold of the bedroom, realizing that the horror he felt was indeed reality. He slowly stepped back, descended the stairs, and, feeling as if trapped in a nightmare, sat down on a chair in the kitchen, staring into the void. His gaze was fixed on a single point, but his thoughts raced. He couldn't believe this was happening to him. How could it be that his wife, the woman he had shared his life with, had betrayed him with a young man he had considered a good match for their daughter? John sat, numb, unable to believe what he had just seen and heard. Inside, something had shifted, as though a deep-seated rage he had never before experienced was slowly awakening. He looked at the flowers he had brought for Sandra, the untouched food on the table, and felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. It was as if this wave pushed out everything else. The pain, the surprise, the disappointment. In their place came a dark, relentless anger that burned inside him like fire. How could she? He thought, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. How could Sandra betray me like this, so cynically, in our own bedroom, in our home, while I work day and night so that she and Emily want for nothing? His heart pounded like a hammer, and each thought made his anger grow stronger. He remembered all the night shifts, the sleepless days, each time he had sacrificed something for himself to put it into their home, for the well-being of his family. He forgave Sandra her dissatisfaction, accepted her criticisms, her coldness and complaints, thinking perhaps they had simply grown tired of each other. But now he saw that all his efforts had been in vain. While he was trying to bring warmth back, his wife was entertaining herself with their daughter's boyfriend. Emily, he thought suddenly. How will she take this? How will she cope if she finds out her mother betrayed her just as she did me? This guy, who seemed so decent, so respectable. John felt sick at the thought that his beloved daughter had no idea the man she loved was shamelessly cheating on her with her own mother. Hurt and anger merged into one feeling, and this emotion would not let him go. He was disgusted by the thought that Sandra had taken advantage of his trust, disregarded his care as if none of it mattered. He'd given so many years of his life to her, and she had chosen a young man, someone who had entered their home through their daughter. For half an hour, John sat motionless, engulfed in a boiling stream of thoughts, bitterness, and pain. A fury burned within him, growing stronger, turning into a dark, uncontrollable feeling. He could think of nothing else, could see nothing else, but the betrayal that was unfolding literally behind the wall of his own home, in the place he considered his sanctuary. clenching his fists, he felt something irreversible shift inside him. Without fully realizing his actions, he grabbed the first object his hand touched, a heavy meat hammer that lay on the kitchen table. Blinded by anger, John slowly headed toward the bedroom, his steps firm and resolute, his gaze full of rage. As he approached the bedroom door, he heard muffled voices. Inside, behind the door, Sandra and Jason were hurriedly discussing that it was time to leave, that they had lost track of time and might be caught. John heard Sandra laugh nervously, as if enjoying her game. That was enough to make the haze before his eyes unbearably thick. He opened the door and walked in, gripping the hammer in his hand. Jason and Sandra froze in place. When she saw her husband in the doorway, Sandra gasped in shock, but didn't even have time to fully realize what was happening. Jason tried to get up, but John was already approaching him. Consumed by rage, he struck several times, causing Jason to lose his balance. Sandra, stunned and shaken, rushed to her husband, pleading with him to stop, but he was unyielding. John turned to her, still not fully aware of what he was doing. He raised the hammer and delivered one final blow, causing her to fall beside Jason. The bedroom fell into a grim silence, broken only by John's heavy breathing. When the rage finally left him, a dead silence hung in the room. John looked around, and it was as if the veil lifted from his eyes. All the rage and anger receded, leaving him alone to face the horrifying reality. He looked at Sandra and Jason's still bodies, barely able to comprehend what he had done. His throat was dry, his breathing heavy and ragged. He slowly sank to the floor beside the bed, staring into space, his hands trembling. Tears began to well up in his eyes, and soon he was quietly sobbing, his body shaking with stifled sobs. Thoughts of the past, of how things might have been different, poured over him in an endless stream. He remembered how he and Sandra had started their life together, how they built this house and dreamed of the future. He thought of every decision he'd made, every missed moment when he should have spent more time with his family, trying to mend the relationship, but now it all seemed out of reach, forever lost. Trying to pull himself together, John shakily dialed the police. As soon as he heard the operator's voice, he confessed to what he had done. His voice weighted with grief as he described the events. The police arrived shortly, but John didn't resist, didn't try to justify himself. He humbly met them and allowed himself to be taken in, knowing that nothing could be changed now. Emily found out everything the next day. She was in another city when the call came. On the other end was an officer who, with sympathy and restraint, informed her about what had happened to her mother and boyfriend, and also that her father had been arrested. These words sliced through her consciousness like a cold blade. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her world collapsed in an instant. She returned home immediately, shocked and broken, as if everything she had known and loved had been erased. Her heart was torn apart by pain, by mixed emotions, love for her father, disappointment in her mother, and the betrayal of her boyfriend, whom she had considered her future. Each new detail she learned about the events felt like another blow. It was hard for her to accept that the person she loved and trusted could be so deceitful and that her own mother could betray her this way. But the hardest part was realizing that her father, her rock, was at the center of this tragedy. At the trial, John remained calm and composed. He didn't try to deny his guilt. He accepted everything he was charged with. He offered no excuses, but his face reflected deep sorrow and regret. He knew he had lost everything that had once mattered to him, and he consciously faced the consequences. Emily attended the hearing. Her heart was torn between two powerful feelings: the understanding that her father had been a victim of betrayal and infidelity, and the pain that he had taken away the only close people she had. She couldn't fully forgive him, but deep down she understood that in his place, she might have felt the same rage, the same emotions. Her heart remained broken forever. She realized that she could never get her old life back, and that memories of her family would always be accompanied by pain. Years passed, but neither Emily nor her father truly healed from the wounds left by that tragic evening. Each tried to cope with the pain in their own way, but the memories of what happened remained in their hearts like unhealed scars. Emily moved to another city, hoping that distance would help her forget. She tried to start a new life, but her peace was constantly disrupted by letters from her father, arriving with unfailing regularity. In each letter, John tried to convey his pain, regret, and hope for forgiveness. However, Emily couldn't bring herself to respond. Each letter reopened old wounds, reminding her of her shattered childhood, lost trust, and the emptiness that now filled her life. As she read his words, she felt conflicting emotions: love, anger, disappointment, and longing. John, understanding that he might never receive a reply, continued to write nonetheless. These letters became his only connection to the past, to the daughter he still loved despite everything. Over time, his letters grew shorter and more restrained, yet he kept writing, hoping that someday Emily might find it in her heart to forgive him, if only in thought. Serving a life sentence, John lived with a single hope that one day Emily would visit him. He knew that he would never regain his freedom, and the only light in his dark reality was the thought of a possible reunion with his daughter.